The Lake Bodom murders, the most twisted unsolved crime you've never heard of. June 5, 1960. The sun never really sets in a Finnish summer, but that morning, the light over Lake Bodom revealed something so horrifying, it still haunts Scandinavia over 60 years later. Just before dawn, a local carpenter was cycling past the peaceful lakeside in Espoo, a small town outside Helsinki. He'd passed this campsite dozens of times before, a favorite spot for teenagers to fish, swim, and share secrets under the pale northern sky. But this time, something felt wrong. The tent was collapsed, shredded, really, its fabric fluttering faintly in the cold wind. The bikes were still there, the fishing rods untouched, but inside, chaos. 3 teenagers, all brutally stabbed and bludgeoned. Blood soaked into the grass and pooled in shallow puddles from the night's dew. And then movement. A boy, barely alive. 18-year-old Nils Gustafsson, his face swollen and torn, stumbled out of the wreckage like a ghost. He was the only one left breathing. His girlfriend, Mila Ermeli Björklund, just 15, was found beside him. Her injuries were the worst. 2 others, Seppo Bluman and Anja Maki, had suffered the same savage fate. No one could understand what had happened. The police arrived within the hour, sealing off the area, but Lake Bodom was remote, open, and wild. The scene was contaminated almost immediately. Curious locals wandered too close, stepping over footprints, picking up items, even moving evidence. Someone, it seemed, had gone mad here, but who and why? The surviving boy, Nils, was hysterical, half-conscious. His shoes were missing. His clothes were soaked with blood, but some of it wasn't his. He mumbled something about a shadow, a man in black, outside the tent, before everything went dark. That was all investigators had to go on. As dawn turned into morning, word of the massacre spread like wildfire. The people of Espoo couldn't believe it. Finland was one of the safest countries in Europe. Murders like this simply didn't happen. But this wasn't just murder. It was overkill. The tent had been sliced from the outside, multiple times, suggesting the killer attacked while the victim slept. Then, as they tried to flee, he struck again, blunt force trauma, stabbing, then silence. And yet, nothing was stolen. The wallets were untouched. The watches were still on their wrists. Even the small transistor radio that played faint music through the night, untouched. This was personal, or completely random, and neither made sense. Over the following days, the Finnish police launched one of the biggest manhunts in their history. Helicopters circled the dense woods. Divers searched the murky edges of Lake Bodom. Every fisherman, farmer, and hunter within 10 kilometers was questioned. Then came the witnesses. 2 birdwatchers reported seeing a strange blonde man near the campsite at dawn. Another claimed he saw a black Volkswagen Beetle speeding away from the lake just after sunrise. A third said he'd heard screaming, but thought it was just kids messing around. There were also rumors, ugly ones, that Nils himself might not have been as innocent as he seemed. After all, how could one boy survive an attack that brutal? How could he not remember what happened? And why was he found lying on top of the tent, not inside it like the others? Police took his torn shoes, his blood-streaked jacket, and his knife for testing. No clear answers. But beneath the calm professionalism, suspicion simmered. Some officers quietly believed the survivor had seen more than he admitted, maybe even done more than he remembered. By week's end, the entire country was obsessed. Newspapers splashed gruesome headlines. Parents kept their children inside. Campgrounds emptied overnight. One of the detectives, Sakari Nurminen, described the scene later. It was as if the earth itself had swallowed the truth. Every clue we found led us further into nothing. And that nothing became the case's defining feature. The knife used in the killings was never recovered. The killer's footprints, if they existed, were trampled by searchers. Even the survivor's memories shifted over time. First he said he saw one man. Later 2. Then he wasn't sure at all. Still, the police kept returning to that strange detail, his missing shoes. A week later, they were found. Half buried in the sand, near the lake's edge, neatly placed side by side, as if someone had set them down deliberately. and on the inside of one heel, faintly visible, was blood that didn't belong to Nils. It was the first real clue, and it changed everything, because the blood didn't match any of the victims. Someone else, someone still out there, had been standing in that sand. And if that person had walked away from Lake Bodom that morning, they'd taken their secret with them. But the discovery of those shoes would soon unravel a theory so shocking it would split Finland in two and turn the lone survivor into the most controversial figure in Nordic crime history. By the time investigators found the bloodied shoes on the shore of Lake Bodom, the country was already obsessed. Newspapers screamed headlines about a masked killer, while others whispered something darker, that the only survivor, Nils Gustafsson, wasn't telling the whole truth. The police were stuck between two impossible theories. Either a faceless stranger had crept into the camp to commit one of the most senseless murders in Finnish history, or one of the victims had turned on their friends. And neither explanation fit cleanly. The investigation expanded across Finland. Detectives reconstructed the crime scene again and again, tracing every footprint, mapping every drop of blood. The tent had been slashed from the outside, or so it appeared. But some cuts didn't make sense. A few ran from inside out, as though someone inside had fought back or tried to escape. And then there was Nils. When police questioned him after he regained consciousness, his story seemed fragmented, confused. He remembered going to sleep beside his girlfriend, Mila, hearing something outside the tent, and then nothing. Darkness. But as days passed, the story shifted. He now recalled waking to see a man standing over the tent, a shadow against the rising light. A flash of steel. A heavy thud. Then pain, blinding pain, and silence. It wasn't much, but it was enough to spark public fear, and something more dangerous, speculation. Who was this shadow? Was he real or a figment of trauma? Witness reports trickled in, each one stranger than the last. A local man claimed he saw two figures walking away from the lake at sunrise. Another said he encountered a disheveled blonde man, shirt stained with what looked like blood. Police followed dozens of leads, but each ended the same way, nowhere. Meanwhile, Finland's quiet confidence in its safety began to crumble. Campgrounds emptied. Parents forbade their children from venturing into the woods. The phrase, "the man from Bodom," became shorthand for evil itself, a faceless terror whispered in classrooms and bars alike. But while the nation looked outward for a monster, detectives began to look inward. They re-examined Nils's injuries. His jaw was broken, his face was swollen beyond recognition, and he'd been stabbed, but not fatally. Forensic experts said he'd likely been knocked unconscious early in the attack. Yet, his injuries were strange. His wounds were mostly to the front, not the back, suggesting a face-to-face struggle, not a sleeping victim ambushed in the dark. And there was the blood. The shoes found at the shoreline carried traces of blood that didn't belong to Nils, or to any of the other teenagers. A fourth, unknown profile. But in 1960, forensic testing was primitive. All they could say was that it came from someone else. That someone had vanished without a trace. Months passed, and pressure mounted on the police to solve the case. The country wanted closure. Politicians demanded progress. Families of the victims pleaded for justice. In desperation, investigators turned to anyone who might have a grudge against the teens, ex-boyfriends, jealous classmates, even soldiers stationed nearby. One suspect stood out, a man named Valdemar Gillström, the owner of a kiosk near the lake. Locals said he hated campers, often yelling at them for littering or making noise. Some even claimed he'd threatened them with violence. When questioned, Gillström denied everything. No alibi, no confession. But months later, he was found dead, drowned in Lake Bodom. It looked like suicide. But was it guilt or something else? Even stranger, his wife reportedly told police that he'd confessed to the murders before taking his own life. Yet her statement was vague, inconsistent, and she later recanted it entirely, claiming she'd been pressured by authorities. The case seemed to fold back into itself, every lead contradicting the next. The deeper they dug, the murkier it became. Years passed. The Lake Bodom murders turned from an open investigation into folklore. But Nils never escaped the shadow. Wherever he went, the whispers followed. The survivor. The liar. The killer who got away. Decades later, forensic science caught up with the mystery. In 2004, 44 years after the crime, Finnish police reopened the case. DNA testing had advanced. They re-examined the clothes, the tent, and the shoes. What they found reignited everything. The blood patterns suggested Nils's injuries didn't match his story. The angle of the blows, the force, the placement. Forensic experts argued that only someone standing outside the tent could have caused the other's fatal wounds. But the patterns of defensive cuts on Nils's hands implied he might have been holding the weapon. Suddenly, the survivor became the suspect. In 2005, Nils Gustafsson was arrested, accused of murdering his friends in a drunken rage. According to prosecutors, he'd fought with Seppo, possibly over Mila, and then snapped, attacking the group in a fit of jealous fury. It was the perfect tabloid twist, the sole survivor revealed as the killer all along. The nation was captivated once again. But as the trial unfolded, the story began to unravel. Nils maintained his innocence, insisting he'd loved Mila and would never harm her. The prosecution's case was circumstantial, built mostly on conflicting interpretations of old, degraded evidence. Witness memories had faded. The scene had been contaminated decades earlier. For every forensic claim, there was a counterclaim. For every accusation, a plausible doubt. When the court delivered its verdict in 2005, the entire country held its breath. The judge's words echoed like a verdict for history itself. There is insufficient evidence to prove guilt. The defendant is acquitted. Nils walked free, cleared of all charges. But for many Finns, the doubt remained. Was he truly innocent, or just the only one clever enough or lucky enough to survive his own crime? The truth seemed to sink beneath Lake Bodom's surface, buried in silence. Yet, years later, divers discovered something else, a rusted knife deep in the silt near the original campsite. Forensics couldn't link it definitively to the crime, but its location, only meters from where the victims' bodies had been found, reignited speculation. Had the killer returned years later to throw it into the lake? Or had it been there all along, waiting for the world to forget? And if so, who really wielded it that night? The answer, as police would soon discover, was more haunting than anyone imagined.